Chapter 11. It's just a power play. Fang Yuan frowned slightly. Based on intuition and 500 years worth of life experience, he could smell a conspiracy. His eyes flashed and he relaxed his brows. I'm a little hungry right now. You came at the right time. Come in, he said. Outside the door, while carrying the food box, Shen Kui smiled coldly as she heard his reply. But when she opened the door, her face was left with a gentle and meek expression. Young Master Fang Yuan, the food and wine smells really good. I can smell it as I hold the box. Her voice was sweet and had a hint of longing and flattery. She put the food box on the small table and took out the dishes, arranging them nicely. The food was indeed very fragrant and tasty. After that, she took out 2 wine cups and poured the wine. Come, young master, sit down. Your servant mustered her courage today and wants to accompany young master for a drink. She smiled like a flower, walking to Fang Yuan's side. Boldly she took him by the hand and pulled him over to sit at the chair by the table. Then she sat on his thigh and leaned her gentle body against Fang Yuan's chest, acting like a timid and lovable woman, whispering in his ear, Young Master Fang Yuan, your servant has always liked you. It doesn't matter what grade you are. I will always wish to be beside you, rely on you, and comfort you. Tonight your servant would like to give her body to you. She really dressed up today. She put on blush, her lips were like cherry powder. When she whispered in his ear, a delicate and youthful breath teased at Fang Yuan's earlobe. Because she was sitting on his lap, Fang Yuan could feel her well-shaped figure easily, her elastic thighs, her slender little waist, and her soft chest. Young master, let me feed you wine myself. Shen Kui picked up the wine cup, raising her head and taking a sip. Then her eyes fixated on Fang Yuan, her small cherry lips a little opened, slowly leaning over to his mouth. Fang Yuan's expression was indifferent, as if what was on his lap was not a young maiden, but a sculpture. When she saw Fang Yuan's expression, Shen Kui felt a little uneasy at first, but when her lips were just an inch away from his, she was assured, sneering in her heart. You're still pretending, she mused. Just at this moment, Fang Yuan scoffed, his tone disdainful. So it's just a power play. Shen Kui's face became stiff, and she swallowed the wine in her mouth, trying to pull false flattery. Young Master Fang Yuan, what are you saying? Fang Yuan's eyes were emitting a cold light. He stared into Shen Kui's eyes, placing his right hand on her snowy white neck, while at the same time slowly pressing it with force. Shen Kui's pupils shrank, and her voice was full of panic. Young master, you're hurting me. Fang Yuan did not answer, but his hold on her neck grew stronger. Young master Fang Yuan, your servant is a little scared. Shen Kui already had difficulty breathing. She was looking flustered. A soft pair of hands subconsciously grasped at Fang Yuan's hand, trying to pry his hand away. But Fang Yuan's hand was strong like iron, unable to be pulled away. Looks like Uncle and Aunt let you over to seduce and frame me. This must mean that there are already people arranged downstairs, huh? Fang Yuan laughed coldly, adding, But who do you think you are, coming to use tactics on me, with the 2 piles of garbage of rotten flesh on your chest? As he said this, his left hand climbed up to her chest and ruthlessly grabbed her soft breasts, making it incredibly deformed all of a sudden. Intense pain flared from her chest. Shen Kui's eyes were round and wide open. The pain was so great that her eyes were full of tears. She wanted to scream, but Fang Yuan gripped her throat so strongly in the end she could only sob for a few times. Then she started resisting strongly, for she really was going to suffocate. But at this moment, Fang Yuan slowly relaxed his grip. Shen Kui immediately opened her mouth and gulped in air greedily. Her breathing was too eager, resulting in a series of violent coughs. Fang Yuan laughed lightly, stretching out his palm. He gently stroked her cheek, his tone carefree as he spoke. Shen Kui, do you think that I can kill you or not? If Fang Yuan roared at her with an evil and loud voice, Shen Kui might actually fiercely retaliate. But when Fang Yuan smiled and spoke in a shallow manner, his soft voice asking if he could kill her or not, Shen Kui felt a deep fear from the bottom of her heart. She was scared. She looked at Fang Yuan with terror on her face, seeing this young man smiling all over his face as he gazed at her. At this instant, Shen Kui vowed to herself that she would never forget his eyes for the rest of her life. This pair of eyes were not mixed with the slightest emotion, dark and profound, resembling a deep, ancient pool that was hiding a horrifying beast. Under the gaze of these eyes, Shen Kui felt like she was naked in the midst of ice and snow. The person before me definitely dares to kill me, is able to kill me. Oh heavens! Why did I come and provoke this kind of devil? Shen Kui's heart was full of remorse. At this moment she longed to turn and flee, but right now she was still on his lap. She did not dare to run away, not even able to pluck the courage to do anything. The muscles of her entire body were tense, her gentle stature trembling. Her face was as pale as white paper, and she could not utter a single word. Since you've been my personal servant girl for so many years, I won't kill you this time. Since you want to escape from slavery, go find my little brother. He's stupid and naive. Fang Yuan retracted his smile and patted her cheek, his tone plain like water. With a sigh, he finally said, "You can leave." Shen Kui was as dumb as a piece of wood as she walked out obediently. She was afraid out of her wits and did not know how she managed to leave the side of the devil called Fang Yuan. The men hidden in the shadows looked confused when they saw Shen Kui come out looking so shaken. They actually arranged such a beautiful trap. It's even more innovative than my previous life. Aunt and Uncle, this kindness of yours I will remember deeply. Not long after Shen Kui left, Fang Yuan stood up and left as well. No matter what, he could not stay at this residence anymore. A wise man sees and mitigates foreseen risks. What more to say for a devil? When there is insufficient strength, only a fool would put himself in danger. Innkeeper, do you have any rooms available? Fang Yuan came to the only inn in the village and asked for a price. Yes, there's room on the second floor and the third floor. Not only is it cheap, the rooms are also tidy and clean. The first floor is the cafeteria. Guests of the inn can come here to eat. There's also a service for asking the inn workers to bring up food to your room. The innkeeper was full of hospitality as he entertained Fang Yuan. This inn was the only one in the village, but the business was not very good. In fact, it was somewhat deserted. Only when the annual merchant caravan came by to trade on Qingbao Mountain, the inn would be full of people. Fang Yuan was a little hungry, so he passed 2 full round pieces of primeval stones to the innkeeper. Give me a good room to stay in, and prepare 2 jars of wine, 3 to 4 different dishes. Return me any excess balance. Done. The innkeeper took the 2 pieces of primeval stone and asked, Would you like to eat in your room, or dine in the hall? Fang Yuan looked at the sky. The rain had stopped, and it was nearing evening. He could simply eat in the lobby and set out straight for the outskirts of the village when he was done, continuing his search for the treasure of the flower wine monk. Thus he replied, I'll eat in the hall. The inn had a dining hall. There were 12 square tables, 4 long benches surrounding each table. In between the tables were huge and thick pillars that were supporting the inn. The floor was covered with big tiles of marble, but it was wet. It was hard to conceal the moisture of the mountain. There were 3 tables seated with people. Seated by the window, an old man was drinking wine, gazing outside at the sunset, being all alone. In the middle of the cafeteria was a table seated with 5 to 6 hunters. They were discussing about their hunting experiences in loud voices, and at their feet was a pile of different kinds of mountain prey, like pheasants and hares. In another corner was a table with 2 young people, seemingly discussing in secret. Their figures were hidden in the darkness. It was hard to see them, and harder to know their gender. Fang Yuan decided to sit by the table nearest to the door. Soon after, the dishes were served on the table. With my sea-grade talent, to refine the moonlight goo, I would need to borrow primeval stones. If my luck is good and this moonlight goo does not have a strong will, I would only need 5 pieces. But if it's stubborn, then I'd be in trouble. Probably need around 8 pieces. Goo are living creatures, so it's natural for them to have the will to survive. Some have a strong will, and would always resist the refinement process. Some goo have a weak will. All throughout the refining, they helplessly surrender. Once there was no resisting, The refining process would become relaxing.
Right now I only have 4 primeval stones on me, since I gave 2 to the innkeeper. There's not enough.
In this world, primeval stones were the local currency, and the buying power is very strong. A normal family of 3 would spend at most 1 piece of essence stone in a month, but when it came to a goo master, the consumption of primeval stones was greater. Take Fang Yuan, for example. Just by refining goo alone, he would need an average of 7 primeval stones or so, and this is just on a moonlight goo. If he really did find the liquor worm, just to refine it with Fang Yuan's grade talent, he would need at least a dozen more.
In other words, right now my situation is, even if I find the liquor worm, I don't necessarily have the primeval stones to refine it. However, I still need to search around, because there's a huge possibility that the Flower Wine Monk's treasure has a huge abundance of primeval stones.
This was not a difficult deduction. The Flower Wine Monk was a rank 5 goo master after all. For such a famous strong warrior of the demonic faction, how could he not have primeval stones, which are the must-have item in a goo master's cultivation? Chapter 12. Green Bamboo Wine is Fragrant. Goo Master Flaunts Power.
Right now, everything comes down to the Flower Wine Monk's treasure. If I can find it, all my problems will be solved. If I don't find it, all these issues will greatly slow down my speed of cultivation. If that happens, I'll lose out to people at my age in cultivating. I don't understand. I spent more than a week trying to attract the liquor worm to appear. Why do I still not see it?
Fang Yuan frowned and racked his brains. It was like putting food into his mouth, but still not knowing how it tasted. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, interrupting his thoughts. Fang Yuan looked at the direction of the sound, realizing that the 6 hunters seated around the table at the middle of the hall were heavily drunk. The atmosphere around them was fiery, and their faces were all red.
Brother Zhang, come, drink another cup. Oh, Brother Fang, we brothers admire your abilities. You took down a black-skinned wild boar alone. What a man! This cup of wine you must drink, or else you'll be disrespecting us.
Thank you, brothers, for your sincerity, but I really can't drink anymore.
Brother Fang can't drink anymore. Perhaps you dislike this wine because it's not good enough. Waiter, come over here. Give me some good wine.
The noise was becoming louder. It was obvious that the group had drunk a lot. The waiter hurriedly went over and said, "Well, good sirs, we do have good wine, but it is quite expensive."
Well, you're afraid we won't pay up?
When the hunters heard the waiter, quite a few of them stood up and stared at the waiter. They were either big and tall or thick and burly in stature, capable and vigorous in a threatening manner, each having the courage that mountain men possessed. The waiter quickly said, I would dare not look down on you, brave men. It's just that this wine is really expensive. 1 jar costs 2 pieces of primeval stones." The hunters were stunned. 2 primeval stones was definitely not cheap. It was the sum of 2 months of the normal average household monthly expenses. Even though the hunters earned more from hunting when compared to ordinary mortals, like how sometimes a black-skinned wild pig could be worth half a primeval stone. However, hunting was risky, and a mistake could turn the hunter into prey. To the hunters, using 2 primeval stones just to drink a jar of wine was just not worth it.
Is it really such an expensive wine? Boy, you ain't trying to lie to us, right?
The hunters were shouting about, but their voices felt a little timid, unable to back out of the situation with grace. The waiter kept telling them that he wouldn't dare. The hunter called Brother Fang saw that the scene was not right, and he hurriedly said, "My brothers, let's not spend any more. I can't drink any more. Let us drink this wine another day."
What? You can't say that, brother. This is...
The rest of the hunters were still shouting, but their voices started to fade away. One by one they sat back in their seats. The waiter was also a shrewd person. When he saw this, he knew that he was not able to sell the wine anymore. However, the situation hardly surprised him. As he was about to retreat, a young man's voice came from the table at the dark corner.
Hilarious. Each one of them blindly shouting for nothing.
If you can't afford to buy wine, you should just obediently keep your mouth shut and go to the side. When the hunters heard this, one of them immediately retorted in anger.
Who said we can't afford it? Waiter, bring that jar of wine. I'll give you the stones, 2 pieces of it.
Oh, give me a moment, sir, I'll get it. The waiter did not expect such a turn of events. He hurriedly replied and turned to grab a wine jar and brought it over. This wine jar was as big as the common wine jar, but the moment it was uncorked, in that very instant, a refreshing and mellow fragrance filled the entire cafeteria. Even the old man sitting alone at the window could not help but turn his head over when he smelled the wine aroma, and he gazed at the jar of wine. It was definitely good wine. Dear guests, it is not bragging. This is the green bamboo wine. The entire village has only one inn, which is us. Smell the fragrance. The waiter inhaled deeply as he said this, his facial expression full of satisfaction and enjoyment. Fang Yuan was moved. This inn waiter was really not boasting. In the Gu Yu village, there were 3 taverns. The wines sold there were the common rice wine, muddy wine, and other similar common wine. In order for Fang Yuan to attract the liquor worm, he continuously bought wine for 7 days. It was natural that he was aware of the prices. Several of the hunters looked at the wine jar before them. They were consumed by alcohol addiction. Each of them twitched their noses and swallowed. As for the hunter who bought the wine in a moment of anger, his expression was even more interesting. A layer of remorse and anger appeared on his face. After all, this jar of wine was the value of 2 primeval stones.
I was too rash and bought the wine by impulse. The waiter is not typical. He immediately bought the wine. Now the cork is unsealed. Even if I want to return the goods, it's too late.
The more the hunter pondered, the more distressed he felt. He wanted to return it back, yet he was unable to do so in fear of being humiliated. At least he could only bang on the table and say with a strong smile,
Damn, this wine is good. Brothers, please drink all you want. Today the wine is on me.
At this moment, the young man at the table in the corner hissed.
How is this small jar of wine enough for 6? If you have the guts, then go buy a few more jars.
The hunter was furious when he heard this and stood up in a rage, his eyes fixed on the young man who spoke.
Brat, you sure have a lot of words. Come on, stand up and fight me.
Oh? Then I will stand up. The young man got up from his seat as he heard the hunter's remark, grinning as he walked out from the shadows. His body figure was tall and thin, his skin pale. He was dressed in navy battle robes and looked clean and neat. His head wore a blue headband. His upper body had a jacket that showed his thin and weak shoulders. The lower body had long pants. The feet were covered in bamboo sandals and calves were tied. The most important thing about him was the green belt on his waist. The middle of the belt was a shiny piece of copper. On the copper plate was a black 1 word.
It's rank 1 Goo Master?
The hunter clearly understood what this manner of clothing represented. He drew in a deep breath, the anger on his face dissipating, replaced by alarm. He'd never imagined that he'd actually provoked a Goo Master. Didn't you want to come fight me? Come on then, hit me. The young Goo Master walked slowly towards the man, a playful smile on his face. But the hunter who had challenged him earlier became frozen like a statue, unable to move from the spot. Maybe you guys can all come at me together. That works too. The young Goo Master slowly walked up to the hunter's table, casually speaking. The expressions on their faces had changed. Some of the hunters who had drunken themselves to red faces had gone pale. Each of their foreheads was drenched in cold sweat, and they felt restless, too afraid to even breathe heavily. The young Goo Master stretched out a hand, picking up the green bamboo wine jar. He put it under his nose and sniffed, smiling. He said, It sure smells good.
If my lord likes it, then please feel free to take it and drink it. It is an apology from me for offending my lord.
The hunter who provoked him earlier hurriedly replied and cupped his hands together before his chest, pushing a smile to his face. Unexpectedly, the young man's facial expression changed fiercely. With a loud crack, the jar fell into pieces on the ground. The Goo Master looked cold as ice, his gaze sharp like a sword. He hissed angrily,
You think you have the right to apologize to me? You bunch of hunters must be really rich, even richer than me, since guys like you spend 2 primeval stones to drink wine? Do you have any idea how upset I am over primeval stones right now? You actually dare to show off your wealth in front of me at a time like this. You mortals can even compare to me? We wouldn't dare.
To offend my lord, it is a heinous crime. We mortals did not mean to offend you. These are our primeval stones. Please accept, Lord Goo Master.
The hunters quickly got on their feet and took out primeval stones they had. But how could these mortals have money? All of them pulled out just bits and fragments of primeval stones. The biggest fragment was no bigger than a quarter of a stone. The Goo Master did not accept these primeval stones, but he did not stop sneering either. He used his hawk-like gaze and swept past the entire cafeteria. The hunters that he scanned over lowered their heads. The old man who sat at the window watching the scene also turned his head to avoid the Goo Master's gaze. Only Fang Yuan watched quietly, void of hesitation. The clothing that this young Goo Master was wearing was the uniform that only formal Goo Masters could wear, so Fang Yuan was not qualified to wear it. Fang Yuan would only receive it from the clan after he graduated from the academy. The word 1 on the copper piece on the belt of the young Goo Master was to indicate his position as a rank 1 Goo Master. However, he was already around 20 years, and the aura of primeval essence on his body emitted seemed to indicate that he was rank 1 upper stage. Starting cultivation at 15 and only reaching rank 1 upper stage at around 20, this showed that the young Goo Master was only of D-grade talent, which was worse than Fang Yuan. There's a high possibility that this man was only a logistics Goo Master, not even counted as a battle Goo Master. However, even if that were the case, when facing these 6 brawny hunters, it was more than sufficient. This was the gap of power between a Goo Master and a mortal human.
With power, one can be at the top. This is the nature of this world. No, actually any world is the same. The big fish eats the small fish, and the small fish eats the shrimp. It's just that this world shows itself more openly,
Fang Yuan mused secretly. Alright, Jingya, you already taught them a lesson. Let's not further embarrass these mortals. If it gets out, even if you are not embarrassed, I would be. The other young person sitting in the corner voiced out. When everyone heard the voice speak, they realized this young person was a woman. The young Goo Master called Jiang Ya stopped sneering as his female companion chided him. He did not even bother looking at the fragments of primeval stones that the hunters had taken out. These stones were not even the sum of 2 primeval stones. He was definitely not interested in it. He flicked his sleeve and walked back to his original table. As he strode back, he said maliciously, "If you think you have the guts to continue drinking, then go and drink green bamboo wine. I want to see who still dares to drink this wine." The hunters all lowered their heads, acting like 6 obedient sons after being scolded. The strong aroma of wine filled the entire cafeteria. The hunter who bought the wine felt his heart aching as he smelled the fragrance. After all, he had spent 2 primeval stones on this wine, yet he never got to drink even 1 mouthful. Fang Yuan put down his chopsticks. He had eaten enough. As he sniffed in the wine aroma, his eyes flashed for a moment. Then he took out 2 primeval stones and put them on the table.
"Waiter, give me a jar of green bamboo wine,"
he said indifferently. The whole scene froze. The young Goo Master called Zhang Ya instantly stopped in his footsteps. The corners of his mouth twitched and he exhaled. He had just finished his warning, yet right after he was done, Fang Yuan wanted the wine. This was like specially stepping over him and slapping him in the face. He turned around and narrowed his eyes, shooting a cold glare at Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan calmly stared back, his face indifferent and devoid of fear. Zhang Ya's eyes flashed and the coldness in his gaze slowly disappeared. He felt the aura of primeval essence on Fang Yuan's body. After realizing Fang Yuan's identity, he lit up with a smile and said warmly, "Ah, it's a junior brother." Everyone else came to the realization, and the looks they shot at Fang Yuan also changed. No wonder this young teenager was not one bit afraid of a Goo Master. It's because he was also one. Even though he was still attending the academy, his position was already different. "Lord Goo Master, your wine!" The waiter scurried over, smiling all over his face. Fang Yuan nodded at the young Goo Master, took the jar of wine, and walked out of the inn. Chapter 13. The Bamboo Forest Under the Moon, a Bead of Snow. Around 300 years ago, an incredible genius appeared in the Guyu clan. He was very talented, and had already cultivated to the point of a rank 5 Goo Master at a young age, and even had the possibility of going further. He was famous throughout Qingmao Mountain, had a bright future, and was the pinnacle of hope and responsibility in the clan's eyes. In the history of the Guyu clan, everyone spoke of him the most, the 4th clan head. Unfortunately, He sacrificed himself to protect his people and fought the equally powerful Rank 5 Goo Master, the demonic Flower Wine Monk. Even though he defeated the Flower Wine Monk after a fierce battle, he let the devil get on his knees and beg for mercy. In the end, he was careless, and got caught by the Flower Wine Monk's sneak attack. The fourth head angrily executed the Flower Wine Monk, but due to his own heavy injuries, he died an untimely death. This tragic incident had long since circulated until today, becoming a popular story among the Guyu clan. However, Feng Yuan knew that this story was not to be believed, because it had a very large loophole. In his previous life, a month from now, a drunken Goo Master who had been rejected by his lover lay down outside the village, so drunk he was like a fish. In the end, because of the overflowing smell of wine, it ended up attracting a liquor worm. The Goo Master chased after the liquor worm and found the remains of the Flower Wine Monk in a secret underground cave, also finding the Flower Wine Monk's inheritance. This Goo Master quickly hurried back to the clan and told them of the matter, causing a huge stir. As the storm gradually subsided, he also gained benefit from it. He obtained the liquor worm, his cultivation increased, the girlfriend who once abandoned him went back to his side, and he became the talk of the village for a while. When stories are passed down generation by generation, it is normal to change along the way. But in Feng Yuan's memories, the story of the Goo Master discovering the treasure seemed quite authentic. Yet he had a feeling the story was hiding other truths.
I was not aware of it at first, but in these few days while I searched and analyzed on the side, I feel that something feels out of place.
The night grew dark, and as Feng Yuan walked in the bamboo forest that grew around the village, he reviewed the clues he had so far in his head.
If I put myself in his shoes and think about it, when I discover the Flower Wine Monk's treasure, why would I not just take it all for myself, but go and notify the clan instead? Don't even mention sense of clan honor. Everyone has greed in their hearts. What is it that would make a Goo Master betray the greediness in his heart, even going as far to be willing to abandon all interest and profit, and report this finding to the clan's top brass?
The truth is always hidden inside the fog of history. Feng Yuan racked his brains, but he could not get the result. After all, the clues he had were too few. The only two clues he had could easily be true or false, so they could not be relied upon. Feng Yuan could not help but think of himself.
No matter what, after buying this jar of green bamboo wine, I only have 2 primeval stones left on me. If I can't find the treasure, then I'll be in grave trouble. Today shall be considered the final gamble. It's all or nothing.
If he didn't have enough primeval stones to refine a goo worm in the first place, why not invest it in the wine and increase his chances of success? If it were the case of other people, most of them would probably play it safe and save up the primeval stones. But in the case of Feng Yuan, the efficiency of doing so was too low. He would rather take the risk and gamble. The people of the demonic faction love to take risks. Right now, the night grew thicker, the spring moon shaped like a bow. Clouds obscured the moonlight, as if coating the crescent moon with a thin sheet of gossamer. Because it just finished raining continuously for 3 days and 3 nights, the turbid energy between the mountains had been washed away clean, leaving behind the purest of freshness. This fresh air was pure like a piece of white paper, and more effective in spreading the wine aroma around. That was the first reason why Feng Yuan was full of confidence tonight. The previous 7 days of searching were not without gain. At least it proved that the Flower Wine Monk did not die in those places. This was the second reason for Feng Yuan's confidence. In the bamboo forest, the grass was luxuriant, the white flowers endless, and the green spear bamboo straight like pencils, the forest resembling a clump of jade rods. Feng Yuan opened the jar's seal, releasing a thick wine aroma instantly. Green bamboo wine could be said as the Guyu village's #1 wine. This was the third reason for Feng Yuan's confidence tonight.
With these 3 big reasons gathering together, if I want to succeed, it has to be tonight.
Feng Yuan cheered in his heart as he slowly tilted the wine jar, pouring a small stream of wine, dripping it onto a stone. If those bunch of hunters saw this sight, they would probably become insanely distressed. This wine is worth 2 primeval stones, after all. But Fang Yuan was indifferent. The fragrant aroma quickly spread out into the night. The breeze was gentle, the faint aroma floating about and contaminating the bamboo forest. Fang Yuan stood at his spot, smelling the aroma. He waited for a while, yet he did not see any movement. All he heard was a nightingale crying in the near distance. It sounded like a string of bells. His gaze was silent. He did not feel surprised. He moved away, walking to a spot a few 100 meters away. In this place he did the same, pouring out a few drips of wine and waiting at the spot. He did the same thing over and over again, moving away to a few other different locations, dripping wine a few times. After all that, the green bamboo wine in the jar was left with only a little bit.
This is the last time,
Feng Yuan sighed. He tipped the wine jar over, bottom facing the sky. All the remaining wine left in the jar flowed out. The wine sprinkled over the grass, letting the green grass sway about. The wildflowers were stained with wine, slightly lowering their heads. Fang Yuan stood with the last shred of hope in his bosom, and gazed around. Right now the night was already very deep. A thick cloud had obscured the moonlight. The dark shadows were like a curtain, covering the bamboo grove. It was deadly silent all around. Each strand of green spear bamboo standing alone, leaving a trail of lines that were straight up and down in Fang Yuan's pupils. He quietly stood at the spot, listening to his own clear breathing. Then he felt the small hope that he carried in his chest slowly dissipating away, becoming nothing.
It failed after all. Today I had 3 great advantages gathered together, yet I still failed, not even seeing the shadow of the liquor worm. This means that in the future the rate of success will be lower. Right now I only have 2 primeval stones left, and I still need to refine the moonlight goo. I can't risk it anymore.
The end result of taking a risk was often unsatisfactory, but when the result was ideal, the profit would be impressive. Fang Yuan liked taking risks, but he was not a gambling addict, and he was not someone who was bent on gambling back what he had lost. He had his own limit. He was clear about his own capabilities. Right now, the 500 years of life experience was telling him it was time to stop. Sometimes life is like this. Often, it was that there was one goal that seemed so perfect, filled with temptation. It seemed so near, yet with so many twists and turns. The goal was constantly unfulfilled. It made people restless, thinking about it night and day.
This is the helplessness of life, but it's also the charm of living.
Fang Yuan laughed bitterly, turning to walk away. It was at this moment. A gust of wind blew, like a gentle arm, lightly brushing away the clouds in the night sky. The clouds floated away to reveal the hidden moon. The crescent-shaped moon hanging in the sky was like a white jade lamp, pouring moonlight that was clear as water down onto the earth. The moonlight spilled over the bamboo forest, spilled onto the mountain rock, bathing onto rivers and streams in the mountain, shedding onto Fang Yuan's body. Fang Yuan was dressed in plain clothing. Under the gentle touch of the moonlight, his young face became fairer. The darkness seemed to fade away in a flash, and taking its place was a field of snowy frost flowers. As if it was infected by the moonlight, the nightingale began to sing once more, but this time it was not just one, but many. Scattered among the bamboo grove, they all tweeted in response. At the same time, a type of insect that inhabited huge mountains, the dragonpill crickets, that were active under the moonlight started singing a rustling song of life. They were critters that only came out at night. Their bodies emitted a faint red light. At this moment they jumped out in droves, each of their bodies flashing with the brilliance of red agate. At first glance, Fang Yuan thought these dragonpill crickets were like jets of crimson water bouncing about, landing on green grass and wildflowers, prancing under the moonlight in the bamboo grove. The bamboo forest was like a conscious pond. Under the moonlight, the green jade colors of the spear bamboo flashed in the brilliance of light and smooth jade, the enchanting sight of the dense trees and bright flowers in the spring. Mother Nature was showing Fang Yuan her immense beauty in this moment. Fang Yuan unconsciously stopped in his footsteps, feeling as if he was in a heavenly land. He was already about to depart, but at this moment he subconsciously looked around. The clump of wild flowers and grass that he had poured the last dredges of wine over trembled gently in the wind, remaining empty. Fang Yuan laughed at himself and took back his line of sight. However, unexpectedly, in the process of turning away, he saw a dot of white snow. This bead of snow was glued to a spear bamboo pole not far away. Under the moonlight, it was like a suspended round pearl. Fang Yuan's two pupils expanded fiercely, his body trembling slightly. His heart dropped and started pumping faster each second. It was the liquor worm. Chapter 14. In the mountain crevice hides a profound theory. The liquor worm was shaped like a silkworm, its entire body giving out a pearl-white light. It was a little chubby and had a cute appearance. The liquor worm fed on wine and could fly. When it flew around, it would curl up into a ball, and its speed was very fast. Even though it was only a rank 1 goo, it was worth more than a few rank 2 goo. To make it into one's vital goo was way more beneficial than the moonlight goo. Right now, the liquor worm was glued to a bamboo pole merely 50 to 60 steps away from Fang Yuan. He held his breath, not closing in rashly, but slowly walking away backwards. He knew his distance was very near, but to really catch a liquor worm directly, it was an incredibly difficult task for a goo master who had just opened the primeval aperture like him. You could say there was totally no hope of success. Fang Yuan was unable to see the liquor worm clearly, but in the darkness he could feel the liquor worm directing its vigilance at him. He slowly backed away gently, trying his best not to disturb the liquor worm. He knew that if the liquor worm was to fly away, he would never catch up to it with his own speed. He needed to wait until the liquor worm drank until it was drunk, and then with its flying speed slowed down, he would have a chance to catch it. Seeing Fang Yuan retreating further away, the liquor worm crawling on the bamboo pole stirred. The strong aroma of wine before it was so tempting, so attracting, making the worm lost in a reverie. If it had saliva, it would have long made a pool of saliva around it. But the liquor worm was incredibly wary and vigilant. Only after Fang Yuan retreated 200 steps back did it shrink a little and bounced into the air. When it fluttered high into the air, its body curled up into a ball, looking like a small and white rice dumpling. The little dumpling swept across the air in a round arc, floating down onto the grass that was sprinkled with green bamboo wine earlier. With delicious food right before its eyes, the liquor worm dropped its guard. It impatiently climbed onto a flower bud filled with some wine and popped its little head in, only leaving a chubby tail on the outside. The liquor worm was ravenous, and the green bamboo wine was so delicious. It opened its mouth wide and inhaled, very quickly lost in the deliciousness of its food, totally forgetting about Fang Yuan. At this moment, Fang Yuan started to approach cautiously. He could see the tail of the liquor worm outside the flower bud. This tail was just like a silkworm's tail, chubby and rounded. The light it emitted made one think of a pearl. At first, the liquor worm's tail was hanging outside, unmoving. Then after a while, this tail started to curl upwards, showing that it was drinking really happily. At the end, when Fang Yuan was only 10 steps away, its tail started wagging and singing a cheerful rhythm. It was totally drunk. Seeing this made Fang Yuan nearly laugh. He did not continue walking forward, but patiently waited. If he rushed over right now, he would definitely have a huge chance of catching the liquor worm. But Fang Yuan's intention was to have the liquor worm guide him to the flower wine monk's remains. In a moment, the liquor worm withdrew from the flower bud. Its body was fatter, and its head swayed about, resembling a drunken man. Unexpectedly, it did not realize Fang Yuan's presence. It climbed up onto another bright yellow flower and perched on the stamen, feeding heartily on the wine droplets there. This time, after it had finished drinking, it finally felt full. Its body slowly shrank into a round ball and slowly flew up. When it was 1.5 meters above the ground, it leisurely flew in the direction of the deeper part of the bamboo forest. Fang Yuan quickly followed after its trail. The liquor worm was already heavily drunk, making it fly slower by half of its usual speed. Even though this was the case, Fang Yuan still had to run with all his might to follow after its shadow. The night was washing past his vision as the young teenager ran in the bamboo forest. chasing after a small bead of snow not far ahead. The moonlight was gentle, the breeze slow and steady. In the bamboo forest that was like a clear pond, the stalks of green spear bamboo flashed past before his eyes, quickly falling behind him. The ground was a green carpet of grass, riddled with blossoming wildflowers. There were small stones with moss growing, and yellow shoots of bamboo. Fang Yuan's faint shadow was also speeding ahead on the ground, passing through the shadows that each stalk of bamboo cast on the earth like a black line. He tightly kept his sight on the bead of snow, gulping in huge amounts of fresh mountain air, ordering his legs to catch up in the midst of the faint wine aroma in the air. Because of his speed, the moonlight looked like water to his eyes. Light and shadow moved frequently, like he was galloping in water filled with seaweed. The liquor worm flew out of the bamboo forest, and so did Fang Yuan. A sea of white flowers with a yellow spot in the middle borrowed the wind from his feet, scattering their petals. A group of dragon pill crickets, resembling a flowing poem, just so happened to move to the front. As Fang Yuan dashed through, there was a swoosh, and a red cloud bloomed before him, dispersing about a sea of red star fireflies that emerged from the cloud. A quiet mountain stream paved with pebbles, the gurgling water surface reflecting the spring moon in the night sky. With a few splashes, Fang Yuan waded across, creating thousands of silver-colored ripples. It was a pity that this stream, after so many ages, had its beautiful and precious stones trampled upon and broken. Fang Yuan was in hot pursuit, firmly following behind the liquor worm, going upward the mountain stream. He could already hear the sound of a waterfall. As he turned around a sparse forest, he saw the liquor worm fly into a crevice in the middle of a boulder. Fang Yuan's eyes lit up, and he stopped in his tracks.
So it's here.
He panted heavily, his heart beating against his chest like mad. With this one stop, he could feel his entire body covered in sweat, hot air surging throughout his body accompanying his accelerating blood flow. Looking around, he found this place was a shallow benchland. Pebbles of various sizes covered the ground, the river surface barely covering over the small stones. There were also blocks of great boulders scattered freely in the area. Behind Changmao Mountain was a huge waterfall. The flow of the waterfall varied with the weather. It plummeted down to the earth, pounding out a deep pool. Beside the deep pool was the Bai clan village, a clan with powerful influence that was comparable to the Guyu village. The waterfall branched out to many smaller branches, and it was apparent that Fang Yuan was facing one of the many branches of a branch. On normal occasions, this benchland was dry, but due to the recent heavy rainfall that went on for 3 days and 3 nights, a shallow stream formed here. The source of the flowing stream was from this huge boulder that the liquor worm had entered into earlier. The boulder leaned against a vertical mountain wall. Small waterfalls that branched away from the main waterfall were like silver pythons that flowed down the mountain wall, hitting onto the boulder. After a considerably long time, the middle of this huge boulder had eroded away and formed a crevice. At this time, as the waterfall washed down, the water current gently roared. It was like a white curtain, completely obstructing the gap in the boulder. After observing his surroundings, Fang Yuan's breathing was no longer anxious. His eyes flashed with a hint of resolve. He walked to the boulder and took in a deep breath, and then rushed in head first. The boulder gap was large, and 2 adult humans could walk side by side in it with no problems. What more to say with Fang Yuan, who was merely a 15-year-old teenage boy. Once he rushed in, the rapid currents pressured down on Fang Yuan's body. At the same time, the cold water quickly drenched him from head to toe. Fang Yuan battled against the water pressure, moving in quick steps forward. As he walked a few dozen steps, the water pressure started to lessen. But the space in the fissure also began to shrink, and Fang Yuan could only walk sideways. His ears were filled with the roaring of water. The top of his head was a sheet of white, and deeper into the boulder was a black darkness. What was hiding in the darkness? It could be a poisonous serpent. Could be a poisonous gecko. Perhaps it was a trap set by the flower wine monk, or perhaps it was empty. Fang Yuan could only continue forward by walking sideways, slowly edging into the darkness. The water no longer washed over his head. The stone walls were covered in moss, grazing against his skin, feeling slippery. Soon he was swallowed by the darkness, and the stone crevice became narrower, squeezing around him. Gradually, even his skull could not rotate freely. Still, Fang Yuan gritted his teeth and continued forward. After walking another 20 more steps, he realized that there was a red shade of light in the darkness. At first, he thought it was an illusion, but when he blinked and focused, he began to confirm that this was indeed light. This realization made him renew his spirit. He continued walking for another 50 to 60 steps, the red light growing brighter. In his eyes, the light slowly expanded into a long, vertical, and fine seam. He stretched out his left arm, suddenly feeling that the wall in front bent away. Instantly he rejoiced, knowing that there was an enclosed space inside the huge boulder. With another few steps, he finally rushed into this light seam. His eyes were greeted with the sight of an approximately 80 meters squared wide enclosure.
I've been walking for so long. With this distance, I'd have long passed the boulder, so I should be in the heart of the mountain cliff right now.
As he sized up this hidden space, he moved his hands and legs about, stretching his limbs. The entire room was filled with dim red light, but he could not tell where the light was coming from. The stone walls were damp and covered in moss, but the air here was very dry. On the walls there were also a few withering vines. The vines intertwined with each other, weaving across half of the wall surface. There were even a few withering flowers growing on the vines. Fang Yuan looked at the remnants of these flowers and leaves, feeling somewhat familiar.
These are wine sack flower goo, rice pouch grass goo.
Suddenly a thought had crossed his mind, and he was able to recognize these withering stems and vines. Goo came in many shapes and forms. Some were like mineral rocks, such as the blue crystal form of the moonlight goo. Some came in forms of worms, such as the silkworm-like liquor worm. There were also flowery, grassy types, just like the wine sack flower goo and the rice pouch grass goo before Fang Yuan. These two types of goo were rank 1 natural goo. Just with pouring in primeval essence, they would be able to grow. After growing up, the middle of the flower would secrete flower wine nectar. The grass pouch would grow out fragrant rice. Fang Yuan moved his line of sight along the vines, and sure enough discovered a heap of withered roots gathered into a ball-shaped clump at a corner. The liquor worm was resting on the clump of dead roots, sleeping soundly. It was already within easy reach. Fang Yuan walked over and took the liquor worm into his arms. Then he got onto his knees and pulled the dead vines apart, discovering a pile of skeleton bones bundled inside.
I finally found you, flower wine monk.
There was a smile on his lips as he saw this. Just as he was about to reach out his hand and strip away the remaining vines, suddenly,
Try touching it!
A voice full of murderous intent suddenly sounded behind Fang Yuan. Chapter 15. History is written by the victorious. In this secret cave, someone's voice loomed behind all of a sudden. Even when it came to Fang Yuan, he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing, his scalp numb. He had been followed. Could it be that him repeatedly going out these few days had aroused the suspicion and attention of people? Or was it someone sent by his uncle? In his mind, he even thought of the rank 1 goo master that he encountered in the inn, the young man called Jiang Ya. In that short moment, his mind flashed countless ideas and guesses, in addition to thinking of a solution. Fang Yuan could feel in that short sentence it was full of deep, murderous intent. This made him secretly groan. He was only a rank 1 initial state right now, and he did not even have a vital goo. To a goo master, this was the equivalent of having 0 fighting ability. How was he supposed to fight?
Too weak, too weak, he roared in his head. You have already been poisoned by my single gate poison goo. Without my other goo that acts as the counterpart to it, after 7 days you will turn into pus and blood and die, the voice said behind him.
Fang Yuan gritted his teeth, his expression cold. He said in a low tone,
You want the liquor worm? I can give it to you.
He slowly stood up, his actions careful. But at this moment, another voice appeared. The voice was full of fear, and said in a tremble, I'll give you it! I'll give you anything! Please just spare my life, O flower wine monk!
Wait a minute. This is...
Fang Yuan frowned and suddenly turned around in realization. He was met with the sight of light and shadow changing and fluctuating on the wall in front of him. A picture emerging. A lean and threatening goo master was standing at the top of a mountain. there was another Goo Master prostrated before him. Around the two Goo Masters was a collapsed pit, fragments and chunks of stone littering the area, showing the obvious scene of a fierce battle that had just ended. Not far away from them was a group of old onlookers, their faces filled with anger and fear. In the middle of the scene, the victorious Goo Master lifted his head upwards and laughed loudly.
Ha 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 ha! Guyu's hero, cultivating to rank 5 at such a young age. I thought you were quite something at first, but I didn't expect you to be so unbearable. Huh!
The laughing Goo Master had long and thin eyes. He was dressed in long pink robes, his huge and wide sleeves swaying with the wind. The area where his robes intersected around his neck was loose and wide open, revealing his strong and pale chest muscles. The most eye-catching part of him was his bald head, shining without a single strand of hair.
The Flower Wine Monk.
Fang Yuan immediately recognized the identity of this Goo Master. To compare myself to Sir Flower Wine, I'm just a fart! I must have been unwell in the head to actually not recognize such a great person and offend Sir Flower Wine. Sir Flower Wine, please remember my clan's generous hospitality earlier and spare my life! The Goo Master prostrated on the ground was shaking, cold sweat all over, tears and mucus mixing as he begged for mercy. Fang Yuan narrowed his eyes and carefully distinguished the two, realizing that the other Goo Master was wearing the Guyu clan head uniform. Looking at the appearance, it was clear that this person was the 4th generation clan leader. As for those aged onlookers, they were probably the clan elders of that generation.
Generous hospitality? You sure have the guts to say it. I was actually sincere in coming to trade with you, using primeval stones to buy your clan's moon orchids with a fair price. It was you who was harboring evil intentions, pretending to greet me and take me in, telling me to take a seat at your banquet, intending to lace my liquor with a poisonous goo. You all have been looking down on me way too much. I have made a living under the sky with the name Flower Wine. How could I possibly be poisoned this way?
The Flower Wine Monk pointed at the kneeling 4th generation clan leader, sneering.
If you cooperated fairly, none of this would have happened. In the end, you just wanted to use my head to raise your reputation and fame. You only have yourself to blame for dying. Sir, please spare my worthless life!
The 4th generation clan head shouted in dismay. His knees scraping against the ground, he quickly crawled over to the Flower Wine Monk's feet and hugged against his thigh.
Sir, my clan has a spirit spring which produces primeval stones. We also planted huge numbers of moon orchids in an underground cave. I am willing to take in your enslavement, Goo, and become your servant. My life and death are at a whim. I am willing to devote a lifelong servitude to you, sir.
Fang Yuan watched speechlessly, while the few elders in the picture looked even more uncertain. The Flower Wine Monk narrowed his eyes. His anger had already calmed down. His eyes flashed and he said,
The enslavement goo is precious beyond reasoning. It is a rank 5 goo. Do you really think I would have one? However, you've been infected by my single gate poison goo. Only I can cure the poison, so I'm not afraid of you disobeying. Since that is the case, your clan has to give me 3,000 stalks of moon orchids every week. Also 3,000 primeval stones. I will come around every now and then to pick up the goods and temporarily cure your poison, sparing your useless life. Thank you so much for your mercy, sir! Thank you so much for your mercy!
The 4th generation clan head cried repeatedly, kowtowing non-stop. His head bled continuously as it bumped against the mountain rock.
Stop kowtowing. I despise groveling people like you the most. What so-called Guyu genius? Strong rank 5 fighter. How unworthy of your name. You better serve me properly. This is also regarding your
The Flower Wine Monk suddenly cried out, his face making a horrified expression. He kicked away the 4th generation clan head with his leg, his body swaying. He frantically backtracked a few steps, yelling at the 4th generation clan head.
How do you still have goo?
The 4th generation clan head was kicked at the pit of his stomach and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He got up with a painstaking effort, his face revealing a scheming smile.
Anyone has the right to punish people of the demonic faction. This goo is called Moon Shadow. It is the best at hiding. Even though it is only rank 4, it has the ability to restrict the usage of the Primeval Sea and Primeval Essence. Demon,
You and I have been fighting fiercely. You don't have many goo on you anymore. How could you possibly restrain the moon shadow? Just obediently surrender and become my servant. As long as you serve me until I'm happy, you will still have a chance to live. The flower wine monk flew into a rage and roared, "To hell with you!" His voice had barely faltered away when his body surged forward like a bolt of electricity, a punch landing on the 4th generation clan head's heart. The 4th generation clan leader did not expect the flower wine monk to be so radical. Even if his primeval sea was threatened, the flower wine monk was unwilling to compromise. A huge force came, and he flew into the air, his body falling onto the ground like a broken sack. The clan head spat out a huge mouthful of blood, red liquid merging with countless bits of internal organs.
Have you gone mad? We could have totally settled this over a discussion.
He stared daggers at the flower wine monk, his lips moving with great effort. His sentence went unfinished, for his legs gave way and his head crooked to the side. He died.
Clan head! Men of the demonic path are all insane! Kill him! Kill this demon! Avenge the clan leader! He has been inflicted by the moon shadow goo. He can't just simply use his primeval essence anymore. Over time, even his primeval essence will be threatened.
The elders who were watching at the sidelines all roared in fury and swarmed the area.
Ha ha ha! All those looking for death, come!
The flower wine monk cried into the air. Facing the elders charging at him, he rushed at them head first. A fierce battle ensued, and the flower wine monk quickly had the upper hand. Very soon, all the elders had collapsed onto the ground, some of them injured, and the rest dead. Just as the flower wine monk was about to finish off the surviving elders, his facial expression suddenly changed, and he covered a hand over his abdomen.
Damn! I'll come back in the future to deal with you lot,
said the flower wine monk. He stared daggers at a few of the elders, and his body moved like electricity as he fled into the mountain woods, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Chapter 16. Taking as much as possible that one can take.
Try touching it. You have already been poisoned by my single gate poison goo. Without my other goo that acts as the counterpart to it, after 7 days you will turn into pus and blood and die.
To compare myself to Sir Flower Wine, I'm just a fart. I must have been unwell in the head to actually not recognize such a great person and offended Sir Flower Wine. Sir Flower Wine, please remember my clan's generous hospitality earlier and spare my life. The scene replayed itself over for the second time on the wall. Fang Yuan remained silent. When the motion picture started to repeat itself for the third time, he finally sighed faintly and said,
I see.
This method of leaving a moving picture with sound on the wall was probably the flower wine monk's doing with the help of a photo-audio goo. This goo was able to record down imagery and project it out later. The photo-audio goo fed on light and sound to survive. For some unknown reason, the secret cave emitted red light, while at the same time the stone crevice was connected to the outside world, so it would not completely isolate the sounds outside. Right now, Fang Yuan could still hear the roaring of the smaller waterfalls. Thus, the photo-audio goo was able to live on in this secret cave. A moment ago, when Fang Yuan ripped away the withering vines, he had probably alarmed the photo-audio goo hiding in the stone wall. As long as one is not stupid, with mere guesswork one could tell that this moving image was authentic. Back then, the 4th generation clan head tried to plot against the flower wine monk, but he failed. After he lost in the battle, he tried a sneak attack. Even though it repelled away the latter, he eventually died because of it. This part of the history was considered disgraceful, and the remaining surviving clan elders decided to tamper with the truth. They reversed the roles of the 4th generation clan head and the flower wine monk. The flower wine monk became the one who was defeated in battle and tried a sneak attack, and later died on the spot. On the other hand, the 4th generation leader was turned into the justified and perfect hero. But the story had a big loophole. The flower wine monk had clearly died on the spot, so his corpse should be in the hands of the Guyu clan. But why was another pile of remains found? In his previous life, the Goo Master who found it had probably been terrified after seeing the moving image. Those surviving elders had long been dead, but to prevent the truth of the flower wine monk from returning, this truth was probably kept secret by the top brass of the clan. That Goo Master realized that if he single-handedly took the treasure, it would be a huge risk. If people investigated and found that he was involved with the flower wine monk in the future, the top brass would naturally execute him. Thus, after making his choice, he did not dare to hide away this treasure. but instead made the decision to notify the top brass. By doing so, it would prove his loyalty to the clan. His subsequent circumstances would also show that he made a wise choice. However, even if he did that, it didn't mean that Fang Yuan would do the same.
I went through a pretty rough time searching for this treasure, so I should take everything for myself. Why should I share it with others? So what if I've been found out without braving the risks? Where would you get profit? That Goo Master is really cowardly.
Fang Yuan smiled coldly, no longer caring about the moving image that kept repeating on the stone wall. He turned around and stretched his hand, using his strength to pull apart the dead vines and roots. The flower wine monk's remains were also affected. It was originally intact, but right now it was being broken into several pieces. Fang Yuan could hardly care. He kicked away a piece of leg bone that was in the way and squatted again, searching through the remains. First, he found a bag of primeval stones. When he opened it, he only found 15 pieces.
Old miser,
Fang Yuan spat. The flower wine monk's outer appearance looked flashy, but unexpectedly, he only had so little money put aside. However, Fang Yuan quickly thought of the reason. The flower wine monk went through a fierce battle. Add on to the fact that he got tainted by the moon shadow goo, he would definitely have used primeval stones to heal his injuries. To be able to leave behind 15 pieces was actually not bad. After that, he found a few dead goo remains. Most of them were flower and grass variety, and all had completely withered away. Goo are also living creatures, so they needed food to survive. Most of them are picky. Though the grass goo and flower goo need less food, in this secret cave, there was not even a single ray of sunshine. And after that there was nothing. The flower wine monk was on the same level as the 4th generation clan leader. After fighting a fierce battle, he fought with around 10 elders right after. His own goo were mostly consumed, and up to this stage, as he wanted to heal his injuries, he grew wine sack flower goo and the rice pouch grass goo here. Yet, in the end, he died because the moon shadow goo dragged him to death. After 300 years, the goo in his possession also died away. The only ones left were the photo audio goo on the wall and the liquor worm. The liquor worm was probably reliant on the wine sack flower goo and barely lived through until today. But as the wine sack flower goo withered away one by one, it also lost its food supply. This prompted the liquor worm to go outside and look for wild wine sack flowers. Then, in this night, it was attracted by the aroma of the green bamboo wine and came out before Fang Yuan.
The photo audio goo can only record once. Since it's a one-time use goo, looks like the liquor worm is my greatest gain here. No wonder that Goo Master decided to report to the clan. Looks like it was because the profit was too small, and not worth such a huge risk.
A sort of understanding rose in Fang Yuan's heart. In his memories, that Goo Master was already rank 3, while the liquor worm was just a rank 1 goo. To Fang Yuan it was more precious, but to that Goo Master it was pretty much nothing. However, it was clear that due to his report, the clan gave him a big reward.
Should I also tell the clan?
Fang Yuan thought for a moment, then he pushed away this idea. The flower wine monk's treasure seemed to be just the liquor worm and the primeval stones, but that was not the case. The most valuable thing was actually the wall that hid the photo audio goo. In other words, it was the moving image that did not stop repeating on the wall. This image could be entirely sold to other villages. Trust in the fact that the top brass of the other 2 villages on Chainbound Mountain must be very interested in this sort of evidence that could strike hard onto the conviction of a clan. What? You're wondering about loyalty and honor to the clan? Well, I'm sorry. Fang Yuan does not have any of that. Moreover, this moving image isn't some kind of strong force that can destroy the entire clan. It won't do much substantial damage. The indifferent nature of the clan will also not look at Fang Yuan with importance. He needed to rely on his own hard work and find cultivation resources. In the early stage of cultivation, he needed to borrow the powers around him more.
Count on the clan?
Fang Yuan sneered in his heart.
How can I be so naive like my past life?
Do not depend on anyone. You must rely on yourself on everything in this world. After making sure that he had ransacked every corner of the cave, Fang Yuan began his way back following the original route home. Holding against the water pressure, squeezing past the boulder, he returned outside the mountain. Looking back at this huge boulder, Fang Yuan suddenly thought of his past life. It was said that the remains were found in an underground secret cave. But how was this place underground? It was clearly inside the mountain wall. No wonder he couldn't find it for 7 days straight, even though he wasted so much effort. Looks like in his past life, after the clan found out about this place, the first thing they did was destroy the wall with the image, and then go about spreading a truth riddled with lies to mislead the clanspeople. To be able to find this place tonight was partly due to luck, partly due to hard work, and the biggest reason would be the green bamboo wine. This green bamboo wine was really rich. It could be said to be the best in Qingmao Mountain. Perhaps in his past life, after that Goo Master lost his lover, the wine that he had been drinking was this wine. But all of this was no longer important. The Flower Wine Monk's treasure had been unearthed and ransacked by Fang Yuan. Although in the end it was rather disappointing, it was also reasonable. The most important was that Fang Yuan's original goal, the liquor worm, was in his hands, and the items he needed the most, primeval stones, were also gotten.
Next up, I will need to set my heart on holing myself in the inn, refining this goo. As long as I have a vital goo, I can return to the academy and be qualified to stay in the academy dormitories. I'll also be able to borrow the clan's resources to cultivate. I can only stay in this inn for 1 or 2 times. If I stay too long, the cost is too much.
Fang Yuan pondered, his footsteps never ceasing as he hurried back to the village. He was originally left with 2 primeval stones, but now he gained 15 pieces, so the total is 17. But to a Goo Master, this small amount of primeval stones still meant nothing. Chapter 17. Starting to refine the liquor worm.
With my C-grade talent, the amount of my primeval C in the aperture is only 44%. The speed of goo using up primeval essence is way faster than my own recovery rate. If I want to refine a goo, I would need to borrow external help, which means I need to waste primeval stones. The weaker the goo's will, the smaller the resistance, the easier it becomes for me to refine it. However, any living creature will always have the will to live. To refine the moonlight goo, I would at least need 5 primeval stones. At most, I'd need 8. Right now, to refine the liquor worm, I would need at least 11 pieces. At most, I would need 16 pieces.
Although the liquor worm was also a rank 1 goo like the moonlight goo, it was definitely rarer. Thus, the difficulty of the refinement process also increased. In other words, even though right now Fang Yuan had 17 primeval stones, just to refine the liquor worm he would at most be left with 6 pieces, or at least 1 primeval stone. In the night, the bright crescent gave off a clear and pure moonlight. The moonlight was like the Lady Saint's gentle hand, lightly stroking over the Guyu village. Along the way, the bamboo houses were like jade, standing in great numbers. The night breeze blew slowly. Under this moonlight, Fang Yuan found his way back to the inn. The inn door had already closed. Fang Yuan banged on the door.
I hear ya. Who is it knocking on the door at this late time?
The inn worker grumbled as he opened the door, his eyes puffy from sleep. But when he saw Fang Yuan standing at the door, all the displeasure and sleepiness from his expression changed, and he bent his waist and said with a flattering smile, "Ah, it's his young lordship. This little one is very lucky to be able to open the door for his lordship." Fang Yuan nodded his head, his expression cold with indifference, and walked into the inn. His expression made the worker laugh in a more humble manner, and he took the initiative to say, "My lord, are you hungry? Would you like me to notify the kitchens and make some small dishes for you as supper?"
No need.
Fang Yuan shook his head and only ordered,
Go and prepare some hot water for me. I'd like to wash myself.
"Yes!" The worker immediately nodded. "My lord, go on to your room first. I guarantee you the hot water will be sent over immediately." Fang Yuan let out a noise of approval and went up the stairs, heading towards the 2nd floor. The worker watched Fang Yuan's back, his 2 eyes glittering in the light, revealing an expression of jealousy. This is a Goo Master. Oh, if only I had the talent to cultivate. How good that would be. He shook his fists, sighing deeply. These words floated into Fang Yuan's ears, and he smiled bitterly in his heart. A Goo Master had the power to transcend mortals, becoming a man above men. But in this process, the price to pay was also very high. The first problem was financial resources. A Goo Master needed primeval stones to cultivate. Battles also needed primeval stones. Refining goo also needed primeval stones. Trading was also not an exception. Without primeval stones, how could cultivation be possible? This point was a difficult position that, being an ordinary mortal who watched from the sidelines, the inn worker would not understand. Just like earlier in the evening, the young goo master Zhang Ya vented his anger and displeasure on the hunters when he dropped their wine jars. His meaning was, he himself could not bear to spend primeval stones to drink this green bamboo wine, yet these hunters who were just ordinary men actually had such money to spare. To take a glimpse at the whole picture, just that meaning alone could tell a lot about the cultivation situation of a goo master. The strength of a goo master is great. They achieve more than a common mortal, but the price is also great. Many a time, using a single piece of primeval stone needed great consideration, especially when it came to lower-ranked goo masters. Do not be fooled by the glorious surface. In reality, the life of a goo master is constantly strained by money.
Not to mention, as the realm of a goo master increases, the resources they require also increase. Without proper backing, it's very difficult for a goo master's road to cultivation.
Fang Yuan thought of his previous life and had a deep understanding of this reality. He returned to his room. Just after he had lit the lamp, the inn worker came up with a basin of hot water. Of course, there were towels and other toiletries. Fang Yuan let the worker leave and closed the room door. He put down the door latch, washed himself, and got up onto his bed. Although his body was feeling tired, his heart flared with a surge of excitement.
I finally got my hands on the liquor worm. The liquor worm is rarer than the moonlight goo, because in a sense, it is a goo that increases a goo master's latent talent.
Fang Yuan sat cross-legged on the bed and took out the liquor worm. The liquor worm was still sleeping soundly. Its body size was slightly bigger than the moonlight goo, soft and white like a silkworm. Under the light, its body was shrouded in a faint layer of wavering light, just like a pearl's mellow luster. Two little eyes resembling two black sesame seeds were mounted on its chubby white head, making it appear charmingly naive. Placed in his hand, it was not heavy. The weight was about half a chicken egg. When smelling it carefully, its body exuded a whiff of wine aroma. This fragrance was not the aroma of green bamboo wine, but the liquor worm's own fragrance. The smell was faint and misty, as if it was not there. Fang Yuan's nose twitched as he inhaled the fragrance of the liquor worm. The wine fragrance moved straight downwards into his aperture, entering into the green copper primeval sea. The primeval sea surged and rippled for a moment, quickly absorbing the wine. A gleam of pure and refined primeval essence was produced. The other primeval essence had an emerald green color, shining with a metallic copper luster. However, this primeval essence was a pale green, and it was more condensed than the original primeval essence. This was the primeval essence that a rank 1 middle stage goo master could produce. Aware of this gleam of pale green primeval essence in his green copper sea, Fang Yuan revealed a satisfied smile.
Right now my cultivation base is just that of a rank 1 initial stage, but with the liquor worms condensing, after the primeval essence is refined, I will be able to have rank 1 middle realm primeval essence. The beauty of this benefit is something that cannot be said in 1 or 2 sentences.
But very soon, he took back his smile.
However, right now, I have yet to fully master the liquor worm. It is only when I refine the liquor worm and turn it into my vital goo, then I will be able to freely use it, and later on, with maximum efficiency, refine my primeval essence.
Thinking up to this point, he no longer hesitated, and began to draw out a jet of green copper primeval essence from his primeval sea. The primeval essence tightly wrapped around the liquor worm, bringing it into the air before Fang Yuan, and started to invade its body. The liquor worm felt its life in danger and woke up immediately. It began to struggle violently, using its own power to drive out Fang Yuan's primeval essence.
This liquor worm has a really strong resistance.
Fang Yuan's complexion turned grave as he felt the consumption rate of his primeval essence go beyond more than double of what the moonlight goo had consumed.
No matter what, I have to refine the liquor worm.
His two eyes flashed with a firm light as he continued pouring primeval essence into the liquor worm. In the room, the candles on the table quietly burned, shining a bright light in the middle of the room while the far corners of the walls were dark. The candlelight radiated on Fang Yuan's face, but he had already closed his eyes, gathering all his focus onto the liquor worm. A continuous jet of green copper-colored primeval essence that resembled a jet of mist emitted out of Fang Yuan's whole body. Then it gathered together and firmly wrapped around the liquor worm. The liquor worm hovered in the air, its distance less than a foot away from Fang Yuan's face. It struggled with all its might in the midst of the green copper primeval essence. Time slipped away quietly. As the candles burned and they became smaller and the light grew dimmer, the crescent outside the window had slowly gone down, and then a new day arrived. The morning light squeezed through the narrow crack in the window and shone into the room. It was like the window had a light edge. Fang Yuan opened his eyes and looked at the liquor worm in front of him. The liquor worm's white body had a shade of green color. This was the result of Fang Yuan's effort after half a night. However, it was clear that this volume of green color was not even 1% of the liquor worm's body. Fang Yuan's face looked grave. This liquor worm's will was way too tenacious, and its resistance was incredibly strong. Simply put, this was beyond a rank 1 goo's boundary.
This goo was most probably the flower wine monk's vital goo. The flower wine monk was a rank 5 master, so this liquor worm was originally rank 5. But because it went through all those years without enough food, pretty much full in one moment, starving in the next, its grade fell. Right now, it's left at the level of rank 1. Yet its will is still as tough as a rock.
Fang Yuan had guessed the truth. This liquor worm was originally the flower wine monk's vital goo. Its original will had been wiped clean and refined to the end. It had accompanied the flower wine monk throughout all his battles, passing through the underground world. After the flower wine monk died, his strong will continued existing in the liquor worm. Right now, with Fang Yuan trying to refine the liquor worm, it actually meant fighting against the flower wine monk's will. This was way more difficult than trying to refine a natural goo. A human's will is generally stronger than a natural goo. When facing death, humans are able to produce strength that even they themselves could not imagine. Not to mention that the flower wine monk was a master of the demonic faction. He came and went by himself, going up and down the underground world. His will was more tenacious than the masters of his level from the righteous faction.
To refine this liquor worm in a month is impossible. Unless there's a strong master who can use a rank 2 or rank 3 goo's breath to pressure this liquor worm and suppress the will inside the worm's body to the lowest limit. Under this kind of help, then I'll be able to do twice as much with half the effort.
As he pondered, Fang Yuan could not help but sigh. His parents are dead, and his aunt and uncle are plotting against him. He himself did not have any backing, so where could he possibly find any external aid? If he had A-grade talent, there might still be a chance. But he was only C-grade. Everyone in the clan was not optimistic about it. So who would be willing to expend such energy to come and help him? More crucially, he could not expose the existence of the liquor worm. There was no liquor worm in the Guyu village, and Fang Yuan was not able to explain about the origins of this liquor worm. If it was exposed, there was a huge possibility that the top brass would find out and link it to the case of the flower wine monk. It was too easy to think of a relationship between the two.
Based on this fact, 17 primeval stones will not be enough. I need at least 30 primeval stones. How troublesome. But no matter how hard it is, I still want to refine this liquor worm.
Fang Yuan's own will was like metal. He was already determined to refine the liquor worm. The importance of vital goo was huge. It would greatly influence the future of a goo master's cultivation direction. Although the liquor worm was not the world's best choice for a vital goo, it was still much better than the moonlight goo. It was also the best option in Fang Yuan's present situation. At this moment, Fang Yuan's stomach came up with a cry of protest. After a whole night without sleep and putting in full effort into refining the liquor worm, Fang Yuan was naturally hungry.
I guess I'll go fill my stomach first and think of a way to accumulate primeval stones.
Fang Yuan rubbed his belly and went downstairs. He went to the cafeteria and picked a seat at the corner, ordering a few kinds of breakfast dishes. Just as he was beginning to eat, his younger brother, Gu Yufang Zhang, appeared.
Big brother, why are you staying at the inn? Why didn't you go back home and sleep last night?
His brother was very straightforward, his tone carrying the implication that it was demanding an explanation. Chapter 18. Let the past disperse away like smoke. Faced with his brother's question, Fang Yuan did not speak. He continued eating his breakfast. He knew his younger brother's character. Fang Zhang was not someone who could keep his composure. Sure enough, Fang Zhang saw that his older brother did not even bat an eye at him, as if Fang Yuan pretended he was air. In the next moment, he called out in a tone full of unhappiness.
Big brother, what did you do to Shen Kui? Ever since she came out of your room yesterday, she cried all over the place. When I comforted her, she cried even more.
Fang Yuan looked up at his younger brother, his face expressionless. Fang Zhang frowned, staring firmly at his older brother, waiting for his reply. The atmosphere was growing tense. But Fang Yuan just looked at him for a second before he lowered his head and continued eating. The younger brother Fang Zheng was immediately flustered. Fang Yuan's attitude was clearly an undisguised contempt towards him. Under shame and frustration, he banged his hand on the table, roaring loudly, "Gu you, Fang Yuan! How can you act like this? Shen Kui as a servant girl has served you for so many years. I've seen her gentleness and care towards you. Yes, I know you feel lost, and I can understand your dejected feelings. Yeah, you're just a C-grade talent, but it doesn't mean you can vent your anger on others just because of your own misfortune. This isn't fair to her." He had barely finished when Fang Yuan stood up, raising his hand in a flash. Slap! With a loud snap, he gave Fang Zheng a solid smack. Fang Zheng covered his right cheek, stumbling 2 steps backwards, his face full of shock.
Useless bastard. What kind of tone are you using to talk to your own older brother? That Shen Kui is just a servant girl. Just because of a lowly girl like her, you would forget that I am your older brother?
Fang Yuan reprimanded in a low voice. Fang Zheng finally reacted, his stinging pain on his face surging through his nervous system in waves. He stared wide-eyed, his breathing rough as he said in disbelief, "Big brother, you hit me? From the time I was still young until I grew up, you've never hit me before. Yes, I was found out to be an A grade and you were just a C grade, but you can't blame me for that. This is all the arrangement of heaven."
Slap!
Fang Zheng had not finished speaking, yet Fang Yuan used the back of his hand and smacked him again. Fang Zheng covered both his cheeks with his 2 hands. He was stunned.
Naive fool. Do you still remember? From young until now, how did I take care of you? When our parents died, our life was hard. During New Year, Aunt and Uncle only gave us 1 new robe. Did I wear it? Who did I give it to wear? When you were small and you loved to eat sweet porridge, I would tell the kitchens to make another bowl for you every day. When you were bullied by others, who brought you back? Not to mention a ton of other things I don't feel like it's worth talking about. Well, right now, because of a maid, you would talk to me like this, coming to question me?
Fang Zheng's face was red. His lips trembled, ashamed and annoyed, as well as surprised and angry. Yet he was unable to say a single word of rebuttal, because everything Fang Yuan said was the truth.
Whatever,
Fang Yuan sneered.
Since you even gave up your own biological parents and admitted someone else, what am I worth to you, as merely your big brother?
Big brother, how can you say that? You also know that I've longed for the warmth of family since I was young.
Fang Zheng immediately explained. Fang Yuan waved his hand, stopping his brother from continuing.
From today onwards, you are not my little brother, and I am no longer your older brother.
Big brother!
Fang Zheng was surprised, opening his mouth to say more. At this moment, Fang Yuan spoke.
Don't you like Shen Kui? Don't worry, I didn't do anything to her. She's still a virgin, untouched and pure. Pass me 6 primeval stones and I'll pass her to you. From today onwards, she can be your personal maid.
Big brother, why are you...
To have his inner thoughts revealed out loud so suddenly, Fang Zheng felt a surge of panic, feeling rather unprepared. But at the same time, his heart was assured. The one thing he was worried about the most did not come true. Not long ago in the night, Shen Kui personally served and washed him. Even though nothing important happened, Fang Zheng could not ever forget the gentleness of that night. Every time when he thought of Shen Kui, he would remember her skillful hands and her soft red lips, and his heart would throb. The sincere feelings of youthfulness had long planted itself in the young man's chest, starting to grow. Thus, when he learned about Shen Kui's unusual state last evening, a bout of anger immediately burst from his heart. He instantly gave up refining his moonlight goo and turned the village inside out trying to find Fang Yuan, wanting to make a statement. Seeing Fang Zheng not replying, Fang Yuan frowned and said,
Love is very normal. Be more honest. There's no use hiding it. Of course, if you don't want to exchange, then that's fine.
Fang Zheng was anxious.
I'll exchange! Why would I not exchange? The primeval stones on me are not enough for 6 anymore.
As he said this, he took out his money pouch, his face red all over. Fang Yuan took the pouch and found 6 pieces in it, but one of the stones among them was smaller than a normal primeval stone by half size. He immediately knew that Fang Zheng had absorbed the primeval essence from this stone to speed up the process of refining his moonlight goo. After all, the more natural essence gets absorbed from the primeval stone, the smaller the stone becomes, and its weight will also become lighter. Even though it was just 5.5 pieces, Fang Yuan knew. These were all the primeval stones that Fang Zhang had in his possession right now. Fang Zhang had no savings on his own, and these 6 primeval stones were what their aunt and uncle had given to him not long ago.
I'll keep these. You can go now.
Fang Yuan's expression was cold as he tucked the bag away.
Big brother.
Fang Zhang wanted to say more. Fang Yuan raised his eyebrows slightly, speaking in a slow and leisurely manner.
Before I change my mind, you better disappear from my eyes.
Fang Zhang felt his heart tighten. He gritted his teeth, and finally turned and left. When he stepped through the doorway of the inn, he subconsciously covered his chest with his hand, feeling a wave of uneasiness. There was a feeling that was telling him that he had just lost something very important. But very quickly he felt hot as he thought of Shen Kui and that dreamy night.
I can finally have you rightfully as mine, Kui Kui.
He did not look back, and walked out of Fang Yuan's sight. Fang Yuan stood expressionless. He stood for a long time. Then he finally slowly sat down. The bright sunlight passed through the window, shining onto his indifferent face, making those who saw this feel somewhat cold inside. The business in the cafeteria was rather poor, and the streets grew busier with people. The noise and excitement from the bustling crowd traveled over, making the place feel quieter. The dishes grew cold. A worker came up attentively, asking if Fang Yuan would like to reheat his breakfast. Fang Yuan did not hear it. His gaze kept shifting like a cloud, as if he was reminiscing some old memories. The worker waited for a while, but as he saw Fang Yuan in a trance, never saying a single word, he could only rub his nose and walk away bitterly. After a long time, Fang Yuan's eyes became focused again. The past memories in his heart were like smoke. They had already dispersed away. He returned to reality once more. The sunlight that had flowed in shone over half the table. The hot air that wafted off of the dishes had already disappeared, and the bustling noise of the crowd on the streets traveled into his ears. He reached into his robes and patted the 5.5 primeval stones at his bosom, his mouth curling into a bitter and mocking smile. But the smile was quickly cast away.
Waiter, go and reheat these dishes for me.
Fang Yuan took a look at his dishes and faintly opened his mouth. At this moment, his eyes looked so chilly.
What? Your older brother really said that?
In the hall, their uncle frowned, his voice cold. Their aunt sat aside, looking speechlessly at the fresh red handprint on Fang Zhang's cheeks.
Yes, when I met Big Brother, he was at the inn eating breakfast. The entire thing went like this.
Fang Zhang replied politely. Their uncle's frown deepened. After a few breaths, he sighed and said in a solemn tone,
Fang Zhang, my child, you must remember this. The maidservant Shen Kui is not Fang Yuan's personal property. We assigned her to him. How can he use her as a trading item? If you wished for it, you should have told us earlier on. We would just assign her to you.
Ah! Fang Zhang was stunned as he listened to this. Their uncle waved his hand.
You can take your leave. You gave all your primeval stones to Fang Yuan, so I'll just give you another 6. Remember, use them properly on refining your goo and seize number 1. We'll be very proud of you when you do.
Father, your child is ashamed.
Fang Zhang was suddenly moved to tears. His uncle sighed and replied,
Just go. Hurry back to your room and refine your goo. You don't have much time left.
When Fang Zhang took his leave, his uncle's face revealed a ferocious and angry expression.
Bang!
He hit the table with his palm, using great force, hissing,
This damn bastard! He actually took our workers to do an exchange. He's really cunning.
His aunt advised,
Husband, calm your anger. It's just 6 primeval stones.
What do you understand, woman? This Fang Yuan is only a C-grade talent. If he wants to refine the Moonlight Goo, he would need primeval stones. With his weak experience as a first-timer, 6 primeval stones won't be enough to refine it. But now that he has 12, it will be more than sufficient.
Uncle was so furious, he gritted his teeth. He added,
A Goo Master's cultivation will be very swift as long as there are enough resources and no obstacles. In 2 or 3 years, the clan will be able to produce a rank 2 Goo Master. The lower Fang Yuan's cultivation rank, the smaller his hopes of trying to seize the family inheritance 1 year later. Right now, he's still young, just starting to cultivate. We shall hinder him and let his starting process fall behind those at his age. The Academy resources are always awarded to excellent students. With his latent talent, once he falls behind, he won't be able to get any resources. Without the help of resources, his cultivation will fall even further. With this vicious cycle, I'd like to see if he has the ability to inherit the family inheritance.
Aunt did not understand.
Even if we do not stop him, he would be at most a rank 1 middle stage a year later. Husband, your cultivation is at rank 2. Why are you still afraid of him?
Uncle was so angry he stomped and said,
Woman, you really are a case of long hair but short insight. With just my identity as the senior, should I really beat down on the younger generation? If he wants to get back the inheritance, it is reasonable and cannot be stopped directly. I can only fight back using the clan's rules. It is stated in the clan's rules, to be head of the house at 16 years old, the person must have at least rank 1 middle stage cultivation. Otherwise it means that Fang Yuan will have no right to waste the clan's resources. After I've said this, do you understand?
Aunt was enlightened. Uncle narrowed his eyes, a glint in his gaze. He shook his head a little, sighing, as he said,
Fang Yuan is just too smart, too cunning. He could even see through a power play. What kind of intellect is this? Scheming and calculating at such a young age. How terrorizing. Initially, I was going to continue plotting against him, yet he moved out straight away. I wanted to further rely on Shen Kui to monitor and trouble him. But in the end, he went away and even earned 6 primeval stones. Alas, if he could be as stupid as Feng Zhang, that would have been great. Alright, from today onwards, you must treat Feng Zhang better. He's an A-grade talent after all. Not to mention, I can see that he has feelings of dissatisfaction and unhappiness towards Fang Yuan. These emotions are a good thing. They must be guided properly. I have a sort of feeling that he will become the best tool to deal with Fang Yuan in the future.
In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. In the room at the inn, there were no lights. The moonlight poured in, casting a color of frost. On the bed, Fang Yuan sat cross-legged, his eyes closed. He moved his green copper primeval essence, concentrating his mind on refining the liquor worm. On its body, a small cut had already been dyed the green color of green copper, but the liquor worm's will was still as tenacious as ever. It constantly struggled in the midst of the ethereal primeval essence. Fang Yuan's refining process was not going smoothly. It was very difficult.
I spent 2 days and 2 nights, only resting 2 hours each day, and I spent 12 pieces of primeval stone, but only managed to refine around 1/15 of this goo. Calculating according to the time, I guess someone will succeed in refining their goo in these few days.
Fang Yuan could see the situation clearly. However, his talent was a poor grade anyway. Add on the liquor worm that he was trying to refine having an incredibly tenacious will to live. It was even stronger than a normal moonlight goo. The resulting situation of falling behind was normal.
A moment of falling behind is nothing, as long as I have the liquor worm.
Fang Yuan's heart was clear like a mirror, not a single trace of anxiety and discouragement in him. Suddenly, the liquor worm curled up into a ball.
Oh no, the liquor worm is counterattacking.
Fang Yuan instantly opened his eyes, a hint of astonishment in his gaze. Before him, the liquor worm had curled into a little round dumpling, fiercely giving out a blinding white light. It was risking everything in this one last stand. At once, Fang Yuan felt a strong will coming out of the liquor worm's body, flowing directly through the primeval essence and descending into the primeval sea in his aperture. The situation where a goo counterattacked was incredibly rare. Only goo with extremely strong will would give it their all. It was either success or death. In the face of such a scenario, the usual teenager would be panicking right now. Though he was surprised, Fang Yuan did not panic. In fact, he was somewhat delighted.
Staking everything in one last attempt. This is also a good thing. As long as I can handle this counterattack, the liquor worm's will shall greatly weaken. However, I need to put full focus into fighting back against this will. I cannot receive even the slightest outside interference, or else that would be bad. I hope no one comes and disturbs me during this period.
His thoughts finalized. He was ready to gather primeval essence in his aperture, ready to accept the liquor worm's will. He would be entangled with it and fight for 300 rounds. But at this moment, a miraculous event happened. In the middle of his aperture, just above the sea high in the air, a goo appeared.
Boom!
A mighty strong breath erupted from this goo. This breath was like the Milky Way, pouring out and floodwater rushing down the mountains. Yet, it was also like a dreadful beast whose dignity was offended that it opened its scarlet eyes and looked around to see who would dare to violate its territory.
This is the spring-autumn cicada?
Seeing this goo, Fang Yuan was completely shocked. Author's note. I will keep going forward. 3 years, 6 years, 9 years. In this period of time, some of you may leave temporarily, and some will stay. In the process of human life, we constantly mark our constant existence, and we all prove to each other that we have lived before. I've imagined this sort of scenario. When we are old, you will all look at Gu Zhen Ren, this ID, and you'll laugh in your hearts. Oh, it's him. When I was young, I'd read this book before. I even gave him a recommendation vote. Maybe I will open my previous layout and see all these familiar IDs, those that have rewarded, voted, and commented before. I will reminisce the times when I was riding alone. These names were the company of my long and difficult journey, giving me warm little lights. Right here in the book is a small little twist. Fang Yuan will begin to truly show his unique style. Those who are able to read up till here are predestined. I guarantee you right here, this book will become more and more exciting. Chapter 19. Rank 6 Vital Goo, the Spring-Autumn Cicada. During the process of refining, the goo counterattacked. At this time, the liquor worm that had inherited the flower wine monk's extremely strong will invaded his aperture, brazenly counterattacking at Fang Yuan. This strong willpower descended from above, surging down towards the bottom of the aperture where the green copper primeval sea was. The waves in the sea tumbled, setting off bursts of a high tide. Under Fang Yuan's will, large amounts of primeval essence rose upwards to the sky and gathered together, forming a towering monster wave, brazenly accepting the incoming liquor worm's will. Just as both sides were about to collide viciously in the middle of the aperture, a faint image of a goo worm emerged in a blank area between the two energies. It was a cicada. The cicada's body was not large. If the moonlight goo was described as a blue crystal shaped like a curved moon, then this cicada would be a delicate craftwork that was made from palm wood and tree leaves by a master craftsman. The goo sported a brownish-yellow head and abdomen. Its surface had the texture of a tree's growth rings, as if it had witnessed countless years. On its back were two very wide and translucent wings, like two tree leaves overlapping. The wings had a similar structure. This structure was like a typical net vein leaf. The center had a coarse stem, and from this stem sprouted out a network of veins on both sides. The spring-autumn cicada. It had been startled. It was like a giant beast, usually hiding in its cave in a deep sleep, but suddenly it was awakened, furthermore learning that its territory had been violated. Who dares to come into my turf and act wildly? As if its dignity was offended, the spring-autumn cicada was angry and let out a whiff of aura. The aura was weak, yet powerful. It was like the surging Milky Way, rolling forth with vast and mighty waves. It would sweep across mountains for tens of thousands of miles, or submerge a broad desert. To be compared to this aura, the liquor worm's will was more like the case of an ant meeting an elephant. The aura swept around and expanded, just like a raised invisible tsunami. The invading will of the liquor worm did not even have the ability to withstand it. It was immediately swallowed whole by this aura. Fang Yuan felt depressed. The green copper primeval essence that he had thrust forward with his might collided with this aura like it was a wave crashing into a great mountain. In a moment, the condensed primeval essence disintegrated and dispersed into rain, scattering down to the primeval sea. The waves on the primeval sea rose one after another. It was like a rainstorm had just swept across, increasing its turbulence. But after a few seconds, the spring-autumn cicada's aura spread down, pressing onto the primeval sea.
Boom!
Fang Yuan felt like he heard a buzz. In an instant, the rolling waves of the sea calmed down. The spring-autumn cicada's aura firmly repressed the entire primeval sea, just like an invisible mountain pressing down. The surface of the sea was calm like a mirror, not a single wave rolling about. It was like a boundless giant hand had come over and flattened an originally crumpled piece of paper. This was an easily incomparable power. Fang Yuan felt a pressure weighing like an enormous invisible mountain pressing down on his heart. He compared it to Sun Wukong being pressed down by the Five Elements mountain. Fang Yuan could not even mobilize a single pint of primeval essence. However, although he was shocked, he was not afraid. In fact, his heart felt great joy.
I didn't think the spring-autumn cicada would actually follow me and be reborn together. So it's actually not a one-time use goo, but one that can be used again repeatedly.
The spring-autumn cicada was a rank 6 grade, and it was the first rank 6 goo in Fang Yuan's previous life, as well as his last. Just to make it, Fang Yuan had to use all his means and resources, wasting an incredible amount of strength, using 30 years of fermenting to finally succeed. But not long after he succeeded, when the spring-autumn cicada was still fresh from the oven, warriors of the righteous faction felt Fang Yuan's threat and gathered together to attack and kill him. After being reborn, Fang Yuan did not find the spring-autumn cicada, so he thought it had died. But in reality, it had fallen into a deep sleep, resting inside Fang Yuan's body. To travel back 500 years in an instant was a huge blow to its vitality. It was too weak, so weak that even Fang Yuan as its master could not feel it. Right now, even though the spring-autumn cicada had appeared, its situation was still bad. After being reborn, it had always been resting in a deep sleep. To appear right now was because it had felt the danger that the aperture was facing. It could be said that the liquor worm's will had awakened it. It was weak. Very weak. Extremely weak. In Fang Yuan's memories, the original spring-autumn cicada was full of vitality. Its body was like a precious floorboard, giving out a warm and glossy varnish. Its two wings were verdant green, like two soft tree leaves that had just freshly sprouted. But right now there was a strong and deathly chill emanating from the body of the cicada. There was no shine or gloss from its body, making it feel rough and dim like dead wood. Its wings were not the color of soft and green leaves. They were fully yellow, just like the withering leaves of autumn. The tips of the wings were slightly rolled up, a little incomplete, just like the corners of fallen leaves. Seeing this, Fang Yuan felt both distressed and lucky. He was distressed because the spring-autumn cicada suffered a heavy blow. It was barely a step away from death, just a foot away from the edge of a cliff. The fortunate thing was, thank the heavens the spring-autumn cicada was weak to this point, or else he would be in great trouble. One must know, between a goo master and a goo, both must complement each other. The best would be both having the same rank. A rank 1 goo master should use a rank 1 goo. This was the most appropriate. If the goo's grade was lower than the goo master, when the goo master uses it, it would be the equivalent of a strong man carrying a small stick. The strength output would be small. If the goo's grade was higher than the goo master, when the goo master uses it, it would be the example of a small child carrying a heavy axe, unable to wield it properly. The spring-autumn cicada was a rank 6 goo, and Fang Yuan was just a rank 1 initial stage goo master. To use an image as an example, the spring-autumn cicada would be a mountain, and Fang Yuan would be a squirrel. If the squirrel wanted to use the mountain to beat its enemy, the squirrel would just be squashed flat by the mountain at the first second. If the spring-autumn cicada was at its peak state, Fang Yuan's weak rank 1 aperture could not even tolerate it. The majestic aura of the cicada would just make the aperture burst to death. Fortunately, it was at its weakest state, so Fang Yuan's aperture could accommodate it right now.
I gave up the moonlight goo, going through all lengths to find the liquor worm just to refine it into my vital goo. But in reality, I already had a vital goo from the start. The spring-autumn cicada is my vital goo.
Fang Yuan's heart was filled with emotion as he felt the close connection between him and the spring-autumn cicada. The vital goo is the first goo that a goo master refines. It is terribly important and would infect the future development of a goo master by a large extent. If a vital goo is well picked, the goo master's development would become smoother. When the vital goo is of a poor grade, to a goo master, it would just drag down his cultivation and let his peers surpass him. The more important thing is that it would affect the matter of life and death in a battle. Feng Yuan was clear on this point, so he was not satisfied after choosing the Guyu's village signature Moonlight Goo. He just had to go all the way to find the liquor worm. In his memory to a rank 1 Goo master, the liquor worm was already considered a high-quality pick. The Moonlight Goo was just a choice that was slightly above average. But life is fascinating, because no one will ever know what is waiting for him or her at the next moment. Feng Yuan had refined the Spring-Autumn Cicada in his previous life. After his rebirth, the Spring-Autumn Cicada fell into a deep sleep, but the connection between them still existed. In fact, Feng Yuan found that, as if going through the refinement of the River of Time, his connection with the Spring-Autumn Cicada had grown even closer and more mysterious than his previous life. It was just because the Spring-Autumn Cicada was too weak, Feng Yuan was not aware of it. Therefore, in a real sense, the Spring-Autumn Cicada is the first Goo that he had refined. The only thing was that the Spring-Autumn Cicada was not refined in his current life, but the result of hard work in his previous life of 500 years. The Spring-Autumn Cicada was Feng Yuan's vital Goo. A rank 1 Goo master, having a rank 6 vital Goo. If this sort of thing was said out loud, it is expected that no one would believe such a thing. This has already broken the limits of human cognition. But yet, it is exactly what happened. The truth is beyond doubt.
The liquor worm as a vital Goo is already one of the best choices, but when you compare it to the Spring-Autumn Cicada, it's just like scum on the ground. My vital Goo in this life is actually the Spring-Autumn Cicada.
Chapter 20. The Academy Elder is speechless. The immense joy he felt did not overcome his mind. He quickly calmed down and started to consider the consequences that the Spring-Autumn Cicada would bring him.
The Spring-Autumn Cicada's ability is rebirth, but right now it is at its weakest state. At the instant I use it, it'll die. However, it is still a rank 6 Goo, so I can definitely use its aura. This won't do any damage to its body.
After he finished pondering, he closed his thoughts and opened his eyes. The liquor worm was hovering before him, shivering in the midst of the smoke-like green copper primeval essence that had surrounded it. Earlier, because it had wanted a chance to survive, desperation drove the liquor worm to risk everything on a single throw, yet in the end its will was easily defeated by the Spring-Autumn Cicada's aura. Due to this, it suffered a heavy blow, its current strength not even 1% of the original will it had.
Spring-Autumn Cicada.
With a simple thought, Feng Yuan released a small trace of the Spring-Autumn Cicada's aura. This aura pressured onto the liquor worm's body. The liquor worm immediately stood still, motionless like a dead creature. Its scattered will felt the Spring-Autumn Cicada's aura. Like a mouse that had run into a cat, it was frightened. It shrank into a ball and was too afraid to move even a slight bit. Feng Yuan laughed and took the opportunity to mobilize his primeval essence. In the beginning, when he tried to use his green copper primeval essence to refine it, the liquor worm's will resisted fiercely, so it could only expand arduously bit by bit. But right now, Feng Yuan's green copper primeval essence drove straight in, flowing vigorously without resistance. There was no obstruction at all. The green copper color on the surface of the liquor worm rapidly expanded. In a few winks, the once pearl-white liquor worm was fully dyed green. The general situation had passed. The last remains of the liquor worm's will was finally washed away easily by Feng Yuan's will, dissolving into nothingness. With that, the liquor worm was fully refined. Compared to the beginning, where Feng Yuan had to endure hardship akin to trampling mountains and crossing ravines, the refining process right now was as easy as swallowing saliva. A kind of mysterious and cordial feeling connected the liquor worm and Feng Yuan together. The refined liquor worm was like a part of Feng Yuan. If Feng Yuan told it to huddle up, it would curl. If he told it to curl into a ball, it would curl into a little round dumpling. The feeling was like moving his own finger. Feng Yuan took back his primeval essence, and the liquor worm returned to its fat and white state. Then with a leap, it went through the thin air and plunged into the middle of Feng Yuan's aperture. When it was inside, the liquor worm flew a distance away around the hovering Spring-Autumn Cicada and entered the green copper primeval sea. On the sea surface, the liquor worm stretched its body arbitrarily. Occasionally, it would twist around its chubby waist, appearing comfortable, as if it was bathing in a hot shower.
With the Spring-Autumn Cicada, my plans will have to change.
Fang Yuan gathered his mind away from the aperture and took out the moonlight goo. He repeated what he did earlier, letting out a hint of the spring-autumn cicada's aura, pressing it down on the moonlight goo. As it felt the spring-autumn cicada's aura, the moonlight goo's will immediately surrendered. Its fear so great its will could only turtle up in the furthest corner of its own body. Fang Yuan's primeval essence poured in. In the blink of an eye, the moonlight goo was dyed a jade green color. Finally, with just a simple thought, the moonlight goo's will was easily strangled. As he was done, he took back his primeval essence and the moonlight goo returned to its original, semi-transparent blue crystal form. He put away the moonlight goo. It did not enter his aperture, but instead directly dropped onto his forehead, forming a pale blue crescent mark in the middle of his brow. The entire refining process of the moonlight goo from beginning to end did not take more than 5 minutes. Comparing the start of his difficult refining process to the situation right now, the speed was rapid and created a sharp contrast. Not only was it very fast, the consumption of primeval essence was also very little. For the past few days, Fang Yuan had consumed 6 pieces of primeval stones just to refine the liquor worm. But tonight, while Fang Yuan could see the bottom of the primeval sea in his aperture, he did not use a single stone.
With the spring-autumn cicada at hand, it is as easy as having a god's help. After today, all I need is to use the aura to pressure down any rank 1 goo, and it will be easily refined. Even though I only have C-grade talent, I don't need to borrow the help of primeval stones. The difference of before and now is like heaven and earth.
Fang Yuan's mood was joyous. Right now, his situation was like pushing away the mist and clouds to see the blue skies. Although the spring-autumn cicada was at its weakest point, it was still a rank 6 goo. A fallen tiger still leaves behind threats. A festered ship still has 3 pounds of nails. Just relying on its aura, Fang Yuan's cultivation from today onwards would receive a huge driving force. At this moment, the moon outside the window was bright and the stars were few. The moonlight flowed through the window, shining on Fang Yuan's face.
Initially, I thought I wouldn't be able to get number 1, but the road twisted and turned unexpectedly. Time waits for no one. I must go to the academy now and receive the top prize.
Fang Yuan's eyes glistened. With a thought, the spring-autumn cicada faded away from view and disappeared once more, returning to its deep slumber. Then he called out the liquor worm and hid it away at the corner of his bed. This was to prevent the academy's unnecessary examination. 15 minutes later, in the clan academy, the academy elder had long gone to bed, but in his dreams he could vaguely hear the sound of somebody knocking on the door. He was awoken by the noise, and he opened his eyes, rather displeased.
Who is it outside there in the middle of the night?
Instantly a voice replied in a respectful tone. Reporting to Sir Elder. It is a student from this year's batch. He's already finished refining the moonlight goo. You have instructed your subordinates earlier to report you the very instant the first name appears, no matter what time it is.
Well, it's true that happened.
The academy elder frowned, and then got off his bed. As he put on his robes, he asked,
Which student is it that got number 1 this year? Is it Gu Yu Feng Zhang?
The subordinate outside the door replied, It seems so. The moment I heard the news, I hurried over here to tell you about it, sir. It seems to be someone from the Fang family branch.
Counting the time, it's probably him.
The academy elder laughed lightly, confidently saying,
Who else could it be besides the A-grade talent genius? All those B-grade talent students would still be in worse, even with the help of primeval stones. Or else why would the grade of cultivation talent be so important?
As he said this, he pushed the door open and came out. Outside the door, his subordinate respectfully bowed, moving 2 steps backwards. Sir is right, he echoed. In the hall, 10 candles or so burned together, brightening up the hall. The man who had received Fang Yuan had already cleared up all doubts by now. Under the bright light of the candle fire, his face showed a stunned expression.
Wait, what did you just say? You're called Gu Yu Feng Yuan, and not Gu Yu Feng Zhang?
Fang Yuan nodded. At this moment, the elder walked in from the entrance. Fang Yuan and the man stood up and turned around to greet him. When the academy elder saw Fang Yuan, his face was full of smiles. He strode over and stood in front of Fang Yuan, patting his shoulder in a friendly manner.
You did well, Gu Yu Feng Zhang. You did not disappoint me. You are indeed an A-grade talent. Genius! All those B grade, C grade peers of yours will never compare to you, no matter how hard they try. Ha 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 ha.
Fang Yuan and Fang Zhang were twin brothers. Their outer appearance was similar to a fault. Even the Academy Elder was mistaken. Fang Yuan was neither haughty nor humble. He took a little step back, letting his shoulder free from the Academy Elder's hand. He stared at the Academy Elder, his hands folded behind his back. Then he said with a faint smile,
Sir Elder, you have been mistaken. I am Gu Yu Fang Yuan. Gu Yu Fang Zhang is my younger brother.
Huh? The Academy Elder opened his mouth slightly, his expression startled. He glared at Fang Yuan doubtfully, his brow turning to a frown. After a few breaths, he finally spoke.
You are Gu Yu Fang Yuan. Correct, sir,
Fang Yuan replied.
You have refined the Moonlight Gu?
The Academy Elder was extremely surprised. His two eyes glared firmly at Fang Yuan's crescent mark on his forehead. His eyes were shining. He was asking the obvious.
Indeed, that is the case,
Fang Yuan said.
Then you are the first of your batch.
The Academy Elder was asking stupid questions, but he was not entirely at fault. After all, this situation was entirely out of everyone's expectations. One must know that he has been in charge of the Academy for decades and is extremely experienced. He had seen C-grade talent students contending for number 1 before this, but it was never this early. Not to mention that in this batch, there were peers with A and B grade talent.
If there's no one earlier than me...
Fang Yuan pretended to be deep in thought, then rubbed his nose and continued.
Then it seems like it.
The Academy Elder was speechless.